limited time. Welcome, welcome, everyone. We have a small crew here. As you can see, it's Kelly and Timmy, and a small crew online. So we'll be able to process a little bit more, which is awesome. And I'm going to share my screen. All right, so just take a breath with me. Ooh. So I'm going to start with this quote by Gary Zukov. When the personality comes to serve the energy of the soul, that is authentic empowerment. So I see a lot of time for integration this week because it was so chock full last week. So last week we did so much of the core basics, and then this week I want to do a good amount of review and integration, do a little history and some resources, and then touch on the wings, and really the integration points are the most content rich stuff we're going to do this week. I did a little video of the sacred self-inquiry process because I was trying to fit it in. And then last week I realized like, oh, an hour and a half goes by so quickly. So I talk a little bit about what to do with our parts that we don't like about ourselves, the contracted parts, stuck parts, personality fixated parts. And there's this little recipe that I have sort of come up with around noticing, giving space, getting curious, and making friends with, because really the idea of conscious personal mastery is all about making space in ourselves for all of the parts of us, not pushing them away. So it's a pretty sophisticated way of thinking about our parts that comes sort of from parts work and somatic experiencing, but hopefully that little video is helpful. It's about 9 minutes, and I shared that in the email. Okay, so I am gonna put the link to my website again in the chat. You can follow along. I tried to put everything we're going to discuss on here. So what I've circled here in red is the wings and the triangles is sort of where we're headed today. And then under the Enneagram images, that's still that same creative journeys image, which is this one, which I love, and also the disintegration and integration image. And I also put the Enneagram percentage by population in here as well, because folks were so curious about that last time. And again, like it's one study's perspective, take it with a grain of salt. Okay, so let's just do a little review and then we can check in a little bit. So we talked last week about the 3 centers, the body center, the head center, and the gut center. I mean, sorry, the body gut center is the same, and then the heart feeling center, and then the head thinking center. And so when we reviewed it last week, we did sort of these summaries at the end of each one. And in the body gut center, it was this underlying sense of powerlessness, anxiety about losing control, compelled to be hyper responsible, keeping feelings at a distance, forgetting the self, and relating or not relating to anger in significant ways in life. And then the heart center, feeling center, over engaging or over performing as a form of self-rejection. And then an underlying fear, concern about being unlovable, anxiety, yet anxiety about really being seen, sadness and shame, fear of emptiness or nothingness. And then the head center, the thinking center, detaching and overthinking diminishes trust, an underlying sense of anxiety, mental sharpness, a lot of tracking of information and also security, and then a disconnection from the body and the heart and sort of dealing, and I think Chang, you said this really well last week, like dealing with a lack of trust, whether that's with information that's being given or people or systems or situations. So overview. And then we sort of reviewed all of these points, which was a lot. So I'm not going to go into all of them, but we spent a good amount of time with all of the points. And we read all of these names for the enneatypes, and also what they're compelled to and what they like to avoid. So hopefully that was a really, really solid overview. And the home inquiry was to contemplate intention, also to look at an emotionally reactive habit that you notice in yourself, and to contemplate which parts of the worldviews of each enneatype sort of stuck out for you. So we are a bit of a small group, but I almost feel like doing a little breakout so folks can talk to each other and just process some of that. Like if you don't know your enneatype, that's fine, but just, maybe just in the breakout room, like just what did you contemplate at all an emotionally reactive habit that you notice in yourself? And which of these enneatypes resonate? Some of you know the enneatypes already. So let me stop sharing here. So how many of us are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. We'll just do a brief check-in in the breakout room. So obviously you two can talk in here, but
Oops. I lost the sound.
Hello, hello, hello.
Okay, I got it.
Great. Okay, fabulous. So Erica and so there's 3 of you in one room and 2 of you in another, and just take 5 minutes, split up the time, 6 minutes, 2 minutes each, and just talk about emotionally reactive habits that you've contemplated, or what of those worldviews of the enneatypes that we went through resonate with you? Which ones do you resonate with as a thing that the way you see the world? Okay, see you in a few. So does anyone online want to share either an emotionally reactive habit or a worldview that you resonated with, or if you discovered your enneatype somehow or have contemplations about it? We'd love to hear from you. Erica, I see you smiling. You want to share?
Yeah, we were just kind of talking about, our experiences with, our interactions with other people. So, Joy was with a large group of people that, were doing a lot of emotional sharing, and she was kind of monitoring how she was reacting. And then I was mostly thinking about over the past week, like people's stress positions, because that's usually pretty easy to identify. And then, based on that, it's like you can kind of follow back to what they would lead with, and then even further back, where their, sort of comfortable position would be. And then, just get a better sense of, how it is that maybe, hopefully, that you would be able to bring them into a place of strength.
Beautiful. Do you know what type you lead with, Erica?
I took 2 of the tests. I took one in a book about a year ago, and then I took one of the online ones. And with both of them, the top 2 scores were the same things. So the top was a 5, and then the number 2 was a 1. But as I'm reading more about it, it's like I almost want to, I don't know, look into it a little bit more and, see what I think matches best for me. But yeah, the 5 actually does match pretty well. And then even, kind of the strength position, and then the defensive position also matches really well. So I can't fight it. But I have to say, when I read the description of the 5, I'm not all that happy with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, which is we often feel when we were starting to learn the Enneagram of like, I don't really want to be that one. And that's a good clue.
You're right.
I want to be a better one. I want to be someone that looks better. And that's a real clue to sort of stay where it's uncomfortable. And we're going to be learning the inner triangle today. And that's a really good point also, Erica, of like, if you can define where you resonate the most, you can often narrow it down to 3 points. And sometimes they're in that triangle and you're like, okay, here I am. Somewhere in here is where I'm residing with my worldview. Yeah, nice. Anyone else want to comment? Okay, I'll have more opportunities. This is way easier than it was last week, Jimmy. Thank you for making this. Jimmy helped me set up a system that works way better. Okay, so that little video about self-inquiry you can watch on your own, and if we have some time today we can talk about it, but I promised you a little history of the Enneagram. Okay, so really it's a modern synthesis of some ancient wisdom traditions that sort of got pulled together, sort of the Kabbalah and Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Taoism, Buddhism, some Greek philosophy, sort of lots of traditions that stretch back. So there's themes that run through the Enneagram. The symbol itself has some pretty ancient roots, and George Gurdjieff, sort of the Russian mystic, he lived between the mid 1800s and the mid 1900s. He sort of brought this graphic to consciousness, but he sort of played around with it in different ways. He worked with it through dance and movement and art and some spiritual consciousness, but hadn't really like named these types. The core of the work really gets attributed to a man named Oscar Ichazo. Ichazo was born in Bolivia, lived and taught and worked in Peru and Argentina, and sort of pulled these ideas together with the actual personality types in the 1960s and 70s. And he lived until recently. I think he just died in 2020. And so this is like, you know, sort of proving that the bringing home the point that I was trying to make last week, which is from his core work, the system was designed to elucidate the relationship between essence and the personality and tease those things apart. I have a quote from him here. And he saw the Enneagram as a way to examine the specific aspects of the human soul and the ways in which we deviate from the soul, where this sort of essence can get distorted or contracted. So this is sort of my lineage as well, my teachers. I mean, sort of all of the Enneagram lineage goes back to Ichazo, but people take it and interpret it in multiple and various ways, which is awesome. So this is a quote from Ichazo. We have to distinguish between a person as they are in essence and as they are in ego or personality. In essence, every person is perfect, fearless, and in loving unity with the entire cosmos. There is no conflict within the person between head, heart, and gut, or between them and other people. Then something happens. The ego begins to develop, karma accumulates, and there is a transition from objectivity to subjectivity. Humans fall from essence into personality. So this is, you know, this is a very advanced, complex, and esoteric understanding. But as we step into the Enneagram, that's the sort of wrapping around it, is that it is this deep of a process. I also wanted to give you some resources. This is one of my favorite books. It's a cartoon book, and it's awesome. They pack a whole bunch of stuff into this book. Really accessible, really fun. You can even work with kids with this book. I highly recommend this book. And especially if you're getting to learn the Enneagram, it has checklists. It has all the Enneatypes at a cocktail party and little word bubbles above their heads and what they're saying. It's super fun. And then anything by Don Richard Riso and Russ Hudson. They have a bunch of books on the Enneagram. They break down, one of their books in this book here, they break down the 9 types into sort of 9 levels from healthy to unhealthy. So like a healthy, any type healthy looks really different than an unhealthy expression. So it's a pretty comprehensive book. And then there's this book by a woman named Sandra Maitre who, oh, I was going to tell you a little more about the history. I'll circle back. Sandra, who was a very early adopter of the Enneagram, and this is the deepest dive of the Enneagram I have ever experienced. She goes into like these holy ideas and sacred longings and ways in which we develop the personality because we came to believe this erroneous truth. And so if you want like a very spiritual, very deep dive, this is your gal. Let me just circle back one quick piece to this history. Right. So from Machazo, a group of Americans went down to Bolivia to study with Ichazo in the 60s. And a man named Claudio Naranjo, you'll hear that name a lot, was an American who studied in, I guess it was Chile at the time, and brought it back to the US and then sort of worked out of the University of California, Berkeley system, and made it popular. And so then like there's this whole cohort of folks who studied in that original group. And you'll hear names like Helen Palmer, she developed a narrative tradition, David Daniels, who was at Stanford, Eli Jackson Bear, who I mentioned, A.H. Almas, who developed the Diamond Way, Sandra Maitre, who I just mentioned, Beatrice Chestnut, and then Riso and Hudson. And all these folks came up in the original Ichazo teachings, and then the Enneagram, sort of flowered out from there. So most of us are students of those original folks in one way or another. Yeah, and just a quick shout out to my teacher, one of my teachers who's in Asheville, North Carolina, where I live. Her name is Sandra Smith, and she's in the narrative tradition with Helen Palmer, and I have learned a ton from her. Okay, so those are resources. So here is a home inquiry for you this week. You can take a screenshot of this, but this is sort of building on the same theme of what we fight, we strengthen. If we see something in ourselves and we push it away, or we exile it, or we struggle with it, we strengthen it. And so the inquiry, the invitation is to a really gentle inquiry. And the questions are, how does your personality show up? What does it protect you from? How does it serve you? And what is the cost? So if we have time today, we can talk a little bit more about that. But I really love this question. It's a little bit like a Zen koan. Like, how do we even identify our personality to know how it shows up, right? This is the process of self-inquiry. Can you all still hear me pretty well? Like, is the volume good? Okay, great. Excellent. Okay, so let's talk about wings. You've probably heard, like, what is this Enneagram thing, this wings? It actually sounds way more complicated than it is. This is one of the really easy components of the Enneagram. It's the exact same chart we've been looking at. Like, you'll see a bunch of these charts. But a wing means that we are influenced by the types on either side of us, along the outside of the wheel, and along the outside of the circle. So wherever we are on the Enneagram circle, in the outside circle, the 2 points next to us are influencing us. Those are our wings. That's what's meant by that. And that is true even if it's in a different center, right? So for the 7, it has one side of it that's an 8, which is totally different center, and then the 6 is in the same center. Often we can have influences by both of those neighbors, but really it's true that we can lean more on one than the other. So you'll hear people say, I'm a 6 with a 5 wing. I'm a 2 with a 1 wing, which means they really lean on that neighbor, and that neighbor influences them significantly. So when we say influences, basically we share traits with that. And then there's nicknames for these types. And you can start to see, like, I'll tell you what the nicknames are, and it's also on my website. And I have this next slide with the nicknames. I wouldn't get too hung up on like remembering these names because it's not that common that people use these names, but it gives you a bit of a flavor. And so we'll start as usual with the 8. And so if someone is sitting at 8 as their main enneatype that they lead with, and they lean more towards the 7, you can imagine that the 7 would give them a more fun, adventurous, enthusiastic perspective. So the 8 with the 7 wing is called the nonconformist. And then if they're the 8 and they lean a little more towards the 9 wing, they're called the diplomat, because they have that super powerful way of being in the world, but then they're influenced by the peacemaker. So I'm just going to put this screen up so you can see. And so the 9 is next. The 9 with the 1 wing is called the negotiator. And you can sort of see that, right? Because the 9 is the peacemaker, and then they lean towards the 1. Leda, I'm just going to mute you. There we go. And then the 9 with the 8 wing is called the advisor. They're going to have some stronger opinions about how things should be done. Type 1 with a 9 wing is called the optimist, and with the 2 wing is called the activist. So again, to go back to this one, here we are sitting at 1, and you can be leaning on one of your neighbor more strongly. So the 1, the 9 wing is the optimist, the 1 with the 2 wing is the activist. And if you read about these types online, these sort of wing influence types, you'll see like it makes a big difference. It can really flavor the person's personality. The 3 with the 2 wing is called the enchanter, because they have this performative, success-driven thing, but they also care a lot about people and serving people. The 3 with the 4 wing is called the expert. The 4 with the 3 wing is called the enthusiast. The 4 with the 5 wing is called the free spirit. I'm going to switch back and forth between these things. The 5 with the 4 wing is called the philosopher. And the 5 with the 6 wing is called the troubleshooter. They put those 2 mental thinking points together. 5 with the 6 wing. The 6 with the 5 wing is called the guardian, because again, they have that loyalist thing. And then the 6 with the 7 wing is called the confidant. And then the last one is the 7 with the 6 wing is called the pathfinder. And with the 8 wing is called the opportunist. Any thoughts about that? Anyone know their wings? Can speak about their wings, have questions about wings? You have to hold this a little lightly if you're just learning it, because the Enneagram is so multi-layered and complex. I would say if you're just learning your Enneatype, do not worry about this. It'll emerge later. But I'll stop sharing this for the moment. And any thoughts on wings? Anybody have a sense of their wings? Do you have a sense of your wing, Kelly?
I feel like I've gone back and forth some over time. But picking from those 2 names, I'd probably pick the free spirit. I'm not actually even sure what the enthusiast. Like I'm not quite grasping that one.
Like I'm a 4 with a 3 wing. So like I organize everything and like make all these community gatherings. Like I have way more of a outward performative, energy. I think you probably have more of a 5 wing. Yeah. How about others?
Like you said last week, like your type doesn't change. can your wing change, or is your wing kind of?
That's a great question. So I'm guessing y'all are hearing them pretty well because of the microphone, but the question is, can your wing change? That is a really great question. And I think there's different schools of thought within the Enneagram. And generally speaking, I think the majority of the schools of thought is like, you really rely on one of those neighbors and get really familiar and good at that neighbor. But you have access to the other one to some extent, right? To some extent.
Because as you were describing it, I was like, oh yeah, I was feeling like, oh, maybe earlier or younger in my life, I was more one than the other, and now I feel like it's flipped.
What's your identity? What is your identity now? 9 with 1?
I was actually thinking I was more a 9 than 8
Mm-hmm.
now, and used to be more of a 1.
I can see that. Yeah. So as we evolve and develop and sort of compensate for some of the things we grew up with, like we might actually grab on different tools. That's an interesting idea. How about some of you all that know your Enneagram or have a sense of it?
Well, I am still not sure. I've done the different tests, and predominantly I come up as an 8 on the tests. And my worldview kind of fits in with that. But also one of them strongly suggested I was a 3, and that 3s are often kind of misidentified as an 8. So that could be possible. So if I'm a 3, I think I really lean toward the 4, because I am an artist. So that kind of makes sense. And I am in my head a lot, and that sort of thing. But if I'm an 8, it just seems like it could be either one, because I have to be very diplomatic in my life, and I don't view myself as fun, but I feel enthusiastic about things and sort of passionate. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's kind of like both.
Yeah, it's hard sometimes to introduce these words because we can get hung up on them. But yeah, I hear, sometimes the 8 and the 3 can look similar. I would say your relationship to anger would be a really important place to look, because 8s have a lot of power that's driven by anger at the world, and that their willingness to confront sort of what's unjust and out of whack with the world. That's so yeah, that's interesting. But yes,
Yeah.
they can sometimes look alike.
Yeah. Well, the anger thing resonates. I have to keep that in check, and my history is driven by that a little bit too. So I think that's why I lean more toward the 8, and
Yeah.
but I have to be more of a diplomat in my life to make things work. So, that's kind of learned behavior.
Right. Yeah. And right, depending on what gender we grew up and what era we grew up, we have different sort of societal influences.
Right.
I'm not allowed to be as big and loud and, angry as I want to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Anyone else have a sense of
I
that?
have more of a question about like, what does it mean to have a win? Does it mean that you take on that type's behavior, but not the core motivation, or you take on a little bit of their core motivation?
You totally got it. It's your core motivation sits in your Enneatype, but you're influenced by your neighbor, and you take on certain characteristics. Absolutely. Like in my case, I'm a 4 and I lean pretty heavily on the 3 wing. And so I can look very much like a 3. I can accomplish a lot. I can be successful. I can have a big to-do list. I'm not really motivated. I'm not motivated by this story of I'm only lovable if I succeed is not really what's running me, but I can sort of borrow a lot of those traits because it gives me some juice. and it gives me some enthusiasm. And enthusiasm is actually a great word. Like people will often say like, you're not a 4, you're too positive, you're too extroverted, which is just a stereotype. We can stereotype these things like anything, any system.
Okay.
Really
Yeah.
good. Do you
You
have a
just
sense?
follow-
I think
What's
you
that?
did. Chang, did you say you were leading with an Enneatype 5?
I say 6,
Oh, 6.
but I mean, I do feel, I mean, I don't resonate with the core motivations of 5, but I do borrow a lot of tools, I guess you would say. And I feel like I live in an age of information, so it helps to be smart about it, to prepare for things and to know a lot. I admire that to some extent. I don't like, I'm not learning just for the sake of knowledge. I'm more like, I like to learn stuff for the practical benefits. So in that respect, I don't feel like it 5.
Yeah, I mean, I think 5s can be really practical in that way. I think they can be, like knowledge, the knowledge keeps them safe kind of thing can apply in lots of different sectors. So yeah, I think you got it right. Your core motivation is, what sort of drives you in an unconscious, like automatic way, and then you're borrowing some of these other traits. That's exactly right. Anything else? Any other thoughts?
I have a question. Is your core motivation and your worldview the same?
Yes.
Or yes. And I don't remember about those. Is there somewhere I can look them up? Because I don't remember. And I'm still trying to figure out if I'm a 4 or a 2. So I'm looking for more information.
Yeah. So certainly the recording from last week would sort of give you a longer rundown, but
Okay.
On my webpage where we sort of went through, and let me just go through them. I'll share my screen. I'll just go through them really quick again, because it's really good to get a repeat. This stuff is pretty thick. So we started with the 8. The 8 likes to, their worldview is that the world is unjust and brutal, and they like to pursue truth and justice. They like to keep situations under control. They like to hide their vulnerability. So they end up showing up in life as super big, action-oriented, protecting themselves and others. 9s, they look out onto the world and believe that they don't matter, that they're invisible. They like to seek peace and harmony and positive mutual regard. They don't like conflict or tension. So they're easygoing, accepting, and they can, in the Enneagram world, they can fall asleep to themselves, is what's often said. 1s look out onto the world and see error. They see that things could be better, and they seek a perfect world. They want to improve the world and everyone and everything around them. So they strive for perfection. They can be opinionated and impatient. So those are the body types, the gut types. The 2s, they want to be liked by those in their world. They look out onto the world and think, oh, it's a very interpersonal world and everybody has these needs. And if I meet these needs, then I will get acceptance and approval and validation and love. So they're empathetic, they're supportive, they can also be manipulative. 3s, they look out onto the world and think that successful people are valued. So they say to themselves, in order to be valued, I must be successful. They're entrepreneurial, confident, results-oriented, competitive. 4s look out onto the world and see that there's significant pieces missing, usually deep and meaningful pieces that are missing. And so they have a deep connection with their inner world and with trying to convey what they see as missing. So they're often artists, musicians. They're trying to express themselves authentically. That would be my guess for you, Joy. I mean, again, with the ethic of the Enneagram, like you're not supposed to tell anybody what they are, but I've known you for probably, I don't know, 25 years.
Well, and you going over, your description of that fits me better than the helper,
Yeah.
I think, which are the two that I've been looking at the most.
And we're going to look at the inner triangle, and you'll realize that those 2 points are very connected. And that's why you see a lot of both in yourself. Yeah, so 4s are pretty inspiring, but they can also get pretty melancholy and sad. 5s look out onto the world and imagine that it's gonna be too demanding for them. They protect themselves from an overly emotional and overly demanding world by gathering information and emotional detachment as a way of staying safe. They can be analytical and objective. They like to be experts at something.
Hmm.
6s look out onto the world and see that it's a pretty unsafe place. And so they like to prepare for the worst and also align themselves with other like-minded people so that there's safety in numbers. Safety is a huge piece. They're often called the loyal skeptic. Very community-minded people for those reasons. But they can also get really, they call it analysis paralysis. They can like try to plan so many things ahead, but they collapse into paralysis. 7s look out into the world and fear that it's trying to limit their options. So they start to crave stimulation, new ideas, new people, experiences. They want to avoid pain and engage in positivity at all times. So they're imaginative, they're quick thinking, they're impulsive, and they flit about a lot. So that was everybody. Is that helpful review?
Yes, I feel pretty sure at this point that I'm an individualist where I'm a 4 with the 5 wing.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Beautiful. That's a great place to start. All right. Anything else on the wings? Any more integration on the wings? Just hold it lightly. You know, the real trick is to continue to feel into core motivations and worldviews and where the personality is fixated, and the wings will sort of emerge as a sort of intermediate step. Okay. Yeah, and this list of names of the wings is on the website, so if you want to check that out, you can look that up. Okay, so we're now going to be talking about the inner triangle or the integration and disintegration points. So the wings were sort of around the outside circle, and the inner triangle is going to be these 3 points. And as I mentioned last week, there's this sacred 3 system in the Enneagram, and this is one of those sacred 3s. The wings are as well, right? You're sitting here and you have 2 neighbors. That's a sacred 3 point. So you'll hear an Enneagram speak with the arrows and against the arrows. This is a common phrase. And so you'll see arrows here, and sometimes charts have arrows both ways, and sometimes they just have arrows in one direction. So this chart has arrows in one direction. Okay, so as we move with the arrow, we are moving towards our disintegration point, the place we go to in stress. With the arrow is the place we go to in stress. Against the arrow, we move towards an integration point, the place we go to when we're more safe or more integrated. So I'm going to break that down, and I'm going to go really slow with it. This is where they get pulled out, and this disintegration is in red and the integration is in green. And so if you find a point on here that is where you think your Enneatype resides, and just take one on for the moment. If you're not sure, just pick one. You'll notice that there's this inner triangle. So as Joy was just saying, if she's sitting at 4, She's a 5 wing because that's her neighbor that she most closely aligns with. But her inner triangle is the 4, the 1, and the 2. So she's going to go against the arrow. Well, in this case, you can't really see the against the arrow. In her disintegration, she's going to go to 2. And in her integration, she's going to go to 1. So if you sit at 9, you're going to disintegrate backwards to 6, and you're going to integrate. These charts are, you're going to integrate to 3. So if a 9 is feeling particularly stressed out, they can get really anxious and worry. You noticed, any of you 9s notice that about yourself? I have a 9 close to me in life, and like she got really wound up around like, and worry. So that's where she's going in her disintegration, and then they can get performative in their integration point. So this is true for each of the types. So let's just take disintegration. The 1 goes to 4. So what that means is the 1s can become moody and irrational and emotional when they're at their stress point. The 2s in their disintegration, they go to 8. So they can become aggressive and dominating when they sit at the 8 point. 3s, they go to 9. In their disintegration, they become disengaged and apathetic. They sort of disappear. 4s, we talked about that. They can go to 2 and they become overly involved. They can become sort of meddly and clingy. It's often said in the Enneagram that we go to the worst traits of those disintegration points, but I don't actually experience that. Like I have a lot of access to 2, and I can do the positive and negative sides of 2. Let's see, 5s can become hyperactive and scattered at 7. 6s can become competitive and arrogant at 3. 7s can become perfectionistic and critical at 1. 8s can become secretive and fearful at 5. 9s can become anxious and worried at 6. So sometimes people will think they're a different point because they've spent a lot of time throughout their life at their stress point, at their disintegration point. So as Joy was just saying, like, I don't know if I'm a 4 or a 2. Like, it's likely that those of us, you know, in a traumatic culture or in a traumatic family or in a situation have developed a really strong relationship with that disintegration point. Like I think I mentioned last week when I first learned the Enneagram, everyone in my life thought I was a 2 because I have a lot of those traits. And I was also in a really intense time in my life where I was spending a lot of time at 2 navigating and managing people outside of me. Okay. So this is the integration component. So it's sometimes called the direction of growth. So 1s go to 7 and they become spontaneous and joyful like healthy 7s. This is medicine. This is the place of medicine for us. If you know, for any of us who are 1s or no 1s, they can be so serious and carry the weight of the world on their shoulders and think they need to fix it all. And so if they can access some of that playful, spontaneous, joyful 7 component, it's really healing for them. Same with 2s. 2s, if they can get off of the story that they need to serve everyone else in the world, and they can act like a 4 and care more about themselves, get really into how they're feeling, what they need, what's important in their lives, the expression, very, very healing for 2s, can go to 4. 3s they go to 6, so they can get cooperative and care about the group, and sort of get off of their performative story. 6s is a really sweet place for 3s to be. 4s can become more objective and principled like healthy 1s. Fives can become more grounded and decisive like healthy eights. That's a really healthy place for fives to be, is to stand up for themselves, to push back, to be decisive, to be even a little controlling, because their tendency is to withdraw from the world. And so if they can like be big, have some big energy and step out into the world, it's a really lovely place for them. Sixes can become relaxed and harmonious, like healthy nines. They can put down the worry and can borrow some of that nine component. And then sevens, let's see. Yes, we started at the ones in this one. Sevens can become more focused and fascinated by life, like healthy fives. They can stop moving around so much. They can stop the three-ring circus of life. And they can focus and maybe become, in deeper relationship with one aspect of their lives. So eights can become more open-hearted and caring, like healthy twos. When eights can spend some time at two, they can become much softer. Nines can become more energetic and performing, focused, and self-developing, paying attention to the self at the healthy 3 point. Okay. So, I think play with this. I think what Erica was saying earlier is that if you notice that you've narrowed down your Enneatype possibilities to a couple or 3 points and they all happen to be on the same inner triangle, you're on the right path. You're just probably seeing yourself move back and forth through those points and have full access. I sort of feel this idea that we move to the positive side of the integration point and the negative side of the disintegration point. That doesn't live as true in me. In me, it sort of lives as I have full access to moving around this triangle pretty easily. Like I can go to the pretty negative side of one, even though one is my integration point. Like I can get pretty critical. Especially and this is maybe the distinction, in a relationship where I'm comfortable and safe, my critical self can emerge. So it's not just the positive sides of those things. So we just notice we're really influenced by this inner triangle. All right, let me stop there for a moment. Any questions about any of that? Anybody have thoughts about their integration and disintegration points they want to share? Anybody notice this in their own process? Is this helpful in determining Enneatype? Liz.
That was really helpful as to helping me understand why I may have come out stronger in the test in different areas. Or I have to admit I took the test more than once, or as leading with different ones, depending on what aspect of the questions I focused on. So.
Exactly. And there's another complicating factor, which we're actually not going to cover in this course, which is lookalike types that have nothing to do with your wings or your triangle. Like there's some types that just look like other types. So that can be tricky. But yes, I think the triangle, as Erica was saying earlier, as you identify that, like, oh, I notice when I get stressed, I act like this. This is a clue for me that I might follow that backwards. Yeah. Very good. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I have a question about this integration. Why would there be this integration though? Like, it's not like every type already has its own weaknesses. Why would you all of a sudden be another type? I mean, every type has downsides already. Or why would you also take on the downsides with not the different type. It seems not necessary, you know?
I love it. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting, like a very integrated system, and because they're all related to each other. How is the best way to say this? So Sandra Maitre, the woman who wrote the book that I said is the super deep dive, she explains it really well. And she calls the integration point the soul child. And I think she got that from Almas. But the idea that the personality is so multi-layered, and really underneath that is, you know, the sort of what she calls the soul child, which is like the place that we actually might authentically exist. Like the personality gets so many layers on it. Like in my case, like I grew up in a very one culture, a Catholic culture, and a, you know, very old school, old world Italian culture. Is a very one family. And so everyone around me, it was like in the one culture. And I sort of developed this other extra layer on top of that, which is the 4 layer. And in some ways, when I sink down into my soul child, like that's actually more, how do I even say it? More familiar to me on a soul level. Like, and it's just that there's learning there for me. It's that there's gifts there for me. And if I can unhook myself from the story that my 4 has, there's even deeper gifts for me at my soul child point, at my integration point. Anybody explain that differently? Do you resonate with that? Do you go to 1 as your soul child, Kelly?
Have you ever heard that term? I've definitely like the very first type I thought I was a 9, and I was like 20, and then at some point that I kind of like was too young to really get so into it, and then I was like got really into it when I was about 28, and I was like, oh, I'm a 1. And it just seemed so clear to me, like I was like just super like at that time that anger and activism and like, you know, just the world could be better, and I don't know, like that was just it just changed my life really, like taking that path. I mean, I just took a totally different direction than what I was doing, and I don't know. But then when I got to the 4, I was like, oh, that's like the part that I'm really not seeing about myself.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I love how you said that. Like, I think what Kelly is saying is like when she got to the 1, there was like a deep, deep resonance of like, oh, right, that's how I'm seeing the world. And then you went even deeper with the Enneagram and you thought, oh, I'm not even seeing the person, like the personality, the 4 personality is what is even more blind to me. That's fascinating. Yeah. Anybody else have reflection or resonance with that? Could say it in a different way. Yeah, go ahead, Wayne.
If I'm an 8, which I don't know for sure yet, but going to the 5 as a disintegration point, that really rings true. But it's also something about myself that I've never really liked a lot. But I know that retreating and being secretive and things like that has been just sort of an instinct, a self-protection kind of mechanism that I've always thought maybe wasn't the healthiest way to react to things. And and then, you know, going to the 2, that's right, isn't it? The 2.
Mm-hmm.
Then I seem to do strive for that, you know, as helping others and doing that sort of thing. And in my profession, I do it. And in my business, I do it. And in my family, I do it. And it's something about myself that I like, you know, that I find some value and then makes me feel more confident. So if I just put it in terms of what I like about myself and what I dislike about myself, that really does ring true. So maybe that's another way of saying it.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it, which is like, it's a little bit of a guiding light. Like if I'm going to get lost and stuck in your case at the 8, like, could the integration point be a guidepost for me of like how to sort of get back to some balance instead of getting caught in the stories and the worldview of the 8, which I know aren't true, but are so compelling.
Mhm.
I love that frame of reference. I might actually, contemplate that and incorporate that, because I really appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. Anyone else? I wouldn't get overly hung up about the inner triangle either. I see this learning as a phased process, and I appreciate the way you said it, Kelly, which is like years went by, right? Like it's like the paradigm shift from like, okay, my worldview is as a 9 to like, no, it's a 1. There's so much resonance to like, oh shit, I'm actually doing this 4 thing, and I'm tripping over this thing, and it's just these layers of self-inquiry that get revealed over time. And that's what I was saying last week about like, this really needs to be a mystery school, because if you're going to do this deep dive into the Enneagram, it's going to take a lot to excavate this stuff and then have these realizations. So excellent. What would be helpful? We have, 30 minutes together. What would be helpful for more integration at this time? I really wanted to leave some space for integration this week, since it was such a fire hose of information last week. And so we have some time. We can go with the inquiry, which is the how does the personality show up question. That's one. We can do some breakouts. We can review some of the stuff we did last week. We can have more conversation about these triangles. It's up to us. What do we want to co-create? What do you all feel that would be helpful to to integrate this information? You can unmute and speak up. That's fine, Liz or Chang or anybody, Frida. Go ahead, Liz.
I don't know. I have like a lot of questions actually, but trying to stay on focus on what we're talking about today. I guess I'm curious a little bit like, what are some tips or things to meditate on or think about to sort of overcome your illusion or be more at peace based off of, the knowledge that, you may be gaining from beginning to learn like what your type may be, or, I think more focus on the self. I'm also curious about like how people would use this information to like interpret others, because that seems really kind of, I don't know. I don't understand that at all yet, but I'm curious about it. But yeah, so those are my 2 questions, I guess.
Yeah. Do you have a sense of what type you're leading with?
Well, not 100% sure, but I think 2, leaning towards 1.
Okay, got it.
Maybe.
Yeah, those were really juicy questions. So I'm hearing you say like, and that's a self-inquiry piece, and we can certainly go there. I have some slides I could show, we can talk about it, but like, what do we do with this information? Like, what is the method? What is the process of self-inquiry? How do we take this and actually live a more soul-guided life, have a deeper intimacy with the soul? Like, that is such a juicy question. Thank you. And then also the question about how do we use this to have more compassion with other people? Those are great questions. How do folks feel about those questions? We can contemplate that some. Are there others? Frida, I think you had a suggestion for integration.
Well, I guess this is just getting into my analytical head, and I do appreciate that comment about compassion, because I want to believe that would be the ultimate perfection of existence, is existing in a state of compassion. But
Yeah,
even just winding our way through trying to figure out the types. And, is that just sort of a circular thinking kind of a process? I mean, I know you can't just do the test and it's like, okay, that's it, how do we start to self-analyze these things and maybe take the blinders off? I feel like that, we all have self identities that may not really be accurate.
It's
That
such
we may
rich,
be,
yeah, such rich questions. So yeah, so not, I think you also combined those two questions, which is how to have compassion. That's a beautiful place to be, but also compassion with the self. And this question about, this is such a deep, complex, esoteric system. Like it's going to take a while to learn it. And in the same process, how do we have an inquiry? How do we notice the self? How do we start to identify components that are personality? Am I in translating accurately?
yes, you are, that you're saying it well.
Great. Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, Erica, please.
I've got a question too. I mean, this is kind of like freestyle time.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if maybe there was something to the scores, at least on both the tests that I took. There was, a couple high ones, but then there was this mid layer that where the scores were really clustered. And then, there was a few where the scores were just really low. And it's like the tests give you numbers for all the types, which sort of leaves it open to, I guess, kind of deeper meaning too.
It gives you percentages for each type. Is that what you mean? Yeah.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the Truity test has gotten very robust. I'm really impressed with that test. And I have seen people take that test and be like even on almost every number. And I've seen people take that test and have two that are like super high and everything else low. So yeah, it varies.
Okay. I wasn't sure if that could translate into more understanding too, or
I mean, there's this saying in the Enneagram world that if you can relate to every type, then you might want to check out the 9, right? Because that's the 9's worldview. It's like I can relate to everything everyone's saying. But that's not always true. Some of us are just in a place where we're like, we have all the parts. So it's not foolproof.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, let's go a little bit to the self-inquiry piece. I mean, I did that video, you can check it out, but let me introduce a little bit of this and then we can talk about it some more. But I'm really hearing this desire for integration about like, what do we do with this? What do you do with this body of information? And how do we use it to have a beautiful relationship with our inner essence? Let me back up here. So this was part of the video, this idea that we are all mysteries to ourselves. We get incarnated. The dogs are howling at the siren. I was like, what is that? It sounds like a pack of coyotes. What's that?
The wolves is the nature center.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's fun. Oh, there's a nature center around here with wolves, and Jimmy was saying that the wolves howl at the nature center. He's like, oh, that's so fun. But yeah, we get handed this incarnation and we are complete mysteries to ourselves, right? And so what is this process of self-inquiry? This process of self-inquiry is just, having some amount of distance from ourselves to be able to notice how we do certain things, right? Especially because as we incarnate, we get handed some really painful experiences, suffering and heartbreak and disappointment and overwhelm and all of the things that happen through our incarnation. And so we're navigating this thing called life and these beings. And really the truth of it is, if we wanted to be totally honest with ourselves, every minute is a complete and utter mystery. What's going to happen next? Like, we're in the best possible drama series we could ever imagine, just being incarnated. And then, you know, that whole thing we talked about last week of like, we grow up in a family or a culture that's like, that's an okay expression of being a human, and that's not, right? So then we have to unpack that. And as much as possible, I think those who are trying to do conscious personal growth is like, can we not make things right or wrong? Can we not have a punishment mindset? Can we like reclaim? So this parts work, this is a super quick intro to parts work. There's a really famous parts work right now called Internal Family Systems. You can check that out. They're awesome. Dick Schwartz developed that system, but parts work comes from many different traditions. And parts work says that we have this core, central, divine, whole, undamaged and undamageable essence. And then this picture is a great example of that, which is these hands that are orchestrating in the middle, which is our soul is orchestrating our lives, our divinity. It doesn't have to be religious, it can be secular, but that there's some overarching orchestration happening that's larger than us. But then all around it, we develop these parts that are adaptations, defense systems, ways of coping in the world. And that's as it should be. That's our personality. And so, but it's also how we protect ourselves, how we separate ourselves, how we convince ourselves that the worldview we have is true. And then we have to fight with that worldview and prove that worldview. And it's a lot of energy, and it often doesn't get us what we want. So then we have a tug of war, sort of, right, between the soul and the personality. And that whole idea of what we resist persists. So parts work helps identify these parts, and it says there are no bad parts. There are no parts of us that are bad. They're just adaptations. They just came to help us make sense of a world, often when we couldn't make sense of a world when we were quite young. And as we integrate those parts, as we hear them, as we listen to them, as we integrate them, our lives become more whole, and we have less noise, and we're able to listen more closely to our essence or to the soul. So this is a little 4-part recipe to deal with some of our broken, damaged, hurt, contracted, pushed away parts, right? And part of what the Enneagram offers us is a noticing. And I loved how Kelly said it, which is, I noticed that it started to come into my awareness that there were parts of my personality that were so hidden to me that I was, you know, she didn't say this, but like almost shocked by it, of like, oh my God, I'm doing that thing and I didn't even notice it until now. So that's where noticing comes in. If you can notice a thing, if we can notice a thing about our personality that we do, and that sort of emotionally reactive habit, we are so far along, right? And then the invitation from there is to give it a little space. Can we give it some space? Can we invite it in? Can we not make it bad? Can we not push it away? Can we just create some space around it? And that leads to step 3, which is, can we get curious? Wow, where did you come from? How did you develop? I wonder what you're here to protect me from. I wonder if you'd be willing to have a cup of tea with me and we can have a conversation. And then the 4th step is having a relationship with these parts, because then that is what leads to the conscious personal mastery. That is what leads to, like, we have a council in here now. Now, you know, there's not some worldview, you know, cracking down, running the show. We have a lot of input from a lot of different parts that have been freed up to have some wisdom. So that's a super, super brief self-inquiry overview. This beautiful quote by Eckhart Tolle, what a liberation to realize that the voice in my head is not who I am. Who am I then? The one who sees that. So this witness consciousness is as close as we can get to bridging to the soul. Like, can we develop the witness consciousness? And then what's the goal of that? The goal of that is becoming whole, growing up, growing our hearts, expanding, living from our highest selves, living a soul-guided life. That's where the juicy stuff is, deeper intimacy with ourselves. So that's a little brief overview of the self-inquiry piece. And I think we can, take the question of like, what is my emotionally reactive habit? And that's a doorway. That's a doorway into how am I protecting myself? Does that make sense? And that's everybody's doorway. When you see someone acting like an a-hole or like this, emotionally reactive thing, you're like, God, that person's like that all the time. That's their version of a really compelling worldview. And those parts are trying to protect them, right? Thoughts about that? It's an emotionally reactive habit that we could, so I have a friend who has an emotionally reactive habit that drives me a little bit crazy, which is to question everything, to be skeptical about everything. Like if I say something like, well, what's the reference for that information? And where did you get that information? And how do you know that information? Like that he's a 6. And so as I've learned more about him, like I know the 6 worldview is like the world is unsafe. And how do I know this information you're giving me is accurate? And like a very abusive, challenging childhood. And so like, if I can start to put those pieces together, I can be like, oh, this skepticism that he has is protecting him. It's like, it's part of his sonar. It's part of how he navigates the world. And I can, at moments, love him for that. And also be like, you know what, when you get into that skepticism thing, like I feel disconnected from you. And like my stuff gets triggered. My stuff kicks in. Like, we're disconnected and I feel disconnected. So then I can have like a different conversation. Is that helpful? What else? Who wants to bring up an emotionally reactive habit and we can think about it in this way, about how to be kind to ourselves? Self-inquiry process. Who has an emotionally reactive habit? Yeah.
I'll come up. I have something. I have a disassociation piece. When I hit something with a large emotional charge, I just, if I can, I walk away. And if I can't, then I disassociate emotionally. And I have learned to notice that. And sometimes I can do some vagal breathing or something and bring myself back, but it's definitely a major influence in my life. Yeah,
beautiful. Yeah, it's a beautiful, and whether you're 4 or you're another type, like 4s can withdraw because what I know what happens to 4 is the whole world is sometimes so emotionally stimulating and overwhelming. And they feel everything. They feel and feel and feel. And so like they have to disconnect, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That definitely rings very true. I went to an event and I had to leave. I mean, I came home every night, but I had to leave sometimes before the end of the event just because I couldn't. It was too many people, too much intensity.
Yeah. So that's from a parts work perspective, that is a beautifully protective part that has served you your whole life. And, from a parts work, this is a little advanced parts work, but it's protecting other parts of you, vulnerable parts that, don't feel safe, parts that don't feel seen. And so like, how do you like really develop a relationship with those, not only those protective parts, but what those parts are protecting. And you learn to navigate the world based on these pieces that are tender in us,
Well, that's an interesting piece though, to look at what they're protecting.
Yeah.
Because I'm fairly familiar with them, but I don't think I really have a sense of what they're trying to protect.
Yeah, usually with a 4, I can say in those situations, and I don't know, other 4s can help me out here, but and you can inquiry yourself and find out, but for me, it would be like I'm at an event and they're being all superficial and I don't feel seen or heard, or like the substance of life is being represented. And so it's like, if I were able to have a deep conversation, I would never get tired. If I were able to have a conversation that was running through the threads of what feels meaningful to me, I would never have to dissociate. But because now I have to navigate this crazy superficial stuff, like I have to leave. Like that's often true for me as a 4. Is that true for you as well? Like if you were able to have a conversation about what's really alive for you, you just never get tired. You could do it all night long.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm. Another emotionally reactive habit somebody want to bring up? Like an 8, I'll take an 8 example since 8 has been coming up tonight, you know, like looking out onto the world and seeing injustice and brutality. And that's a very, very, very compelling worldview. That's a lens, right? And what is often there, if the 8 can sit with that long enough, is it's really vulnerable to be human. It's really vulnerable. And can they sit with that vulnerability, that innocence, because that big powerhouse energy is protecting the vulnerable places. So what does it look like to notice the power, the justice warrior piece, and then also the vulnerability piece? And to the 4, like, can we learn to stay at the party where ordinariness and normalness and superficiality is being talked about and not collapse, right? This is an invitation. It doesn't always have to be deep and meaningful. We can design our lives for depth and meaning, for sure, but can we also stay present to other opportunities without collapsing, without dissociating? Yeah, and these noticings, and these are just inquiries. There's no right or wrong. There's no good or bad. These beautiful parts have served us in extraordinary ways. What else? What's another emotionally reactive habit? You want to give your example, Jimmy?
Well, one is like just in traffic, or anytime I feel like the people around me aren't aware of how they're impacting the people around them, I would just get really agitated and angry. And if I'm in the car by myself, I'll just be like screaming. If somebody else is there, it usually like distracts me or calms me down. But if I'm by myself, I would just get like, yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Right.
Right,
because so Jimmy leads with a 9, any type, and so the access to anger is really awesome. First of all, like the fact that you're able to get angry in your life is like, yes, bravo, because I'm sure there were times in your life when you wouldn't let yourself get angry. But the idea that other people are reflecting to him the worldview that he doesn't matter. So I'm just going to cut you off in traffic. I'm just going to step ahead of you in line. I'm just going to not consider your feelings, like reinforces the worldview that I don't matter.
right.
And so then the anger comes up, right? So that's an opportunity to look at like, wow, this is reflecting my worldview that is so compelling. And it's actually not very true. People cut people off because they cut people off.
Right.
But it's an opportunity to sort of unpack that a little bit, to notice, to give space, to get curious, and to become friends, really, ultimately. What else? 7, worldview, you know, the world is constraining my options, right? It wants to limit my adventure. It wants to limit myself, my movements. And that's a very compelling worldview. And so 7s get very scattered. They don't stick to things. They often can't follow through on things. And so what's an opportunity to sit with the parts underneath that, which is I'm scared to be trapped. What does it look like to sit with I'm scared to be trapped? Can we notice that? Can we notice that part? Because once we have access to noticing those, what they call in parts work exiles, we free up a lot of energy. Because when we're spinning our wheels in our defense systems, all of our energy is going to our defense system, as opposed to making some extra space for what that defense system is protecting. And then we've freed up some access to a bigger truth, to a bigger worldview. How was that helpful? Any last thoughts?
I was just thinking about, she was saying about like getting triggered by people not doing kind of like what they're, like not being aware of the people around them, and like Kenny has that same trigger. My partner is also, we disconnected from him.
Yeah, it ran out of juice.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but it's like, it's not coming from, I don't think the invisible, I mean, it's just an example of like kind of having different motivations, but having the same.
Yes,
You know what I mean?
absolutely. I love that you brought that up. So Kelly, the screen froze, but Kelly's bringing up the point of like, yeah, many types can get triggered about other people not being considerate, but it's coming from a slightly different motivation. And I'm guessing, and Hanny is Kelly's partner, Hanny's motivation is, I care so much about the whole, and I care about, like this worldview of like, we're all in this together kind of thing, that when someone does something inconsiderate, it's offensive to my view of the whole, which is a different motivation, right? So it's like, that's why the Enneagram says, don't look at actions and habits necessarily, but like the underlying worldview that is offensive to, right? Yeah, very nice, very good. Well, I'm going to share a Rilke poem with you, which sort of speaks to this. This is a Robert Bly translation. So this is how I think about this, is that whoever is beaten by this angel, like this is the personality, like our most cracked places, our most shattered places, our most heartbroken places, our most defended places are the doorways into loosening its grip. And it's counterintuitive because we don't want to go towards those places, but it is the exact place to go. So this is a Rilke poem. Whoever was beaten by this angel went away proud and strengthened and great from that harsh hand that kneaded her as if to change her shape. Winning does not tempt that woman. This is how she grows, by being defeated decisively by constantly greater beings. I'm gonna read it one more time. Whoever was beaten by this angel went away proud and strengthened and great from that harsh hand that kneaded her as if to change her shape. Winning does not tempt that woman. This is how she grows, by being defeated decisively by constantly greater beings. So the invitation, where was it? Hold on, let me find it. The invitation for this week. Oh, I just had it. How does your personality show up? What does it protect you from? How does it serve you? What does it cost? That's a rather complex set of questions. So if you just wanted to boil that down to one question, it is just notice. Just notice what your personality does, your automatic habits, and just give it space. Instead of being reactive, we're inviting these personality components in because they're doorways. They're doorways to our actual wholeness. Any last thoughts? Any last shares? Any last contemplations?
Well, can you put it up one more time so I can write it down, the thing? I'm sorry.
That's fine. You can take a screenshot or a photo instead of writing. It's quicker. Any last thoughts? I really appreciate having more integration time this week and getting into some of these deeper components, which is like the self-inquiry process leading to a more soul-guided life, more intimacy with the self, and the courage to be in the places that we often push away. Ready for me to stop sharing? Great. Any last thoughts? Anybody who didn't speak up tonight? Julie, do you want to speak anything into the space? You're muted, sweetheart.
Jeez. No, I don't. I'm feeling really out of it because I've been sick all weekend. So I feel really fuzzy.
Yeah, well, thank you for showing up and just your beautiful presence and taking in what you could take in.
Yeah, I enjoyed being present, and I'm sorry I didn't contribute anything.
Yeah, just our presence is contributing a lot. And even the folks who aren't here, hello, we'll see you later on the recording. But yeah, this integration was really important for me because it felt like a lot last week. And, you know, I think you're starting to get the sense how this three series course is just a tiny little intro, and that really what this needs is a mystery school. And really, it's sort of a cohort of people who are willing to hold each other's hands and be like, oh God, my personality does this thing and it doesn't serve me. Like, let's reflect to each other, you know?
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful, the Enneagram is a beautiful tool in that way.
Yeah.
All right, beloveds. See you next week.
Okay. Thanks, Lee.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.